Imagine you wake up tomorrow and your job is completely gone. No meetings, no emails, no performance reviews, no manager named Gary who sends passive-aggressive Slack messages at 7 in the morning. Just you, a clear day, and absolutely nothing you are required to do. Most people find that idea either deeply relaxing or deeply terrifying, depending on how much of their identity is tied to their job title. But here is the strange part. That exact scenario was the default human experience for the vast majority of our existence. Modern humans have been around for roughly 300,000 years. Formal employment, the kind where someone else owns your time in exchange for money, has existed for maybe 10,000 of them, which means for about 97% of human history, nobody had a job. And what people actually did with all that time turns out to have a genuinely surprising answer. The most obvious assumption is that ancient humans spent every waking hour in a desperate struggle to survive, hunting before breakfast, defending the cave after lunch, collapsing from exhaustion by sunset. It is a dramatic image, and it is mostly wrong. Picture instead a morning in southern Africa, around 100,000 years ago. The fire has burned down to embers, and a small group of maybe 20 people is stirring slowly in the early light. Meat left over from a successful hunt 2 days ago gets reheated. People sit together, eating and talking with the ease of a group that knows where its next meal is coming from, because right now they do. A hunting party will head out later, but the rest will not, because the food situation is currently fine and nobody has anywhere to be. In 1966, anthropologist Marshall Solins reviewed studies of contemporary hunter-gatherer societies and found that adults were spending somewhere between 15 and 20 hours per week on food-related activities. He called them the original affluent society, not because they had material wealth, but because they had something arguably more valuable: time. The skeletal evidence confirms this from a different angle entirely. When archaeologists compare ancient hunter-gatherer bones to the bones of early farming populations, the farmers look significantly worse. Shorter in stature, with signs of nutritional deficiency, repetitive stress injuries, and teeth riddled with cavities from diets suddenly dominated by starchy grains. The hunter-gatherers had stronger skeletons and far less evidence of chronic physical punishment. Moving your body through varied terrain while occasionally hunting turned out to be considerably healthier than spending every day bent over a field performing the same motion 10,000 times. So if ancient humans were not exhausted all the time, what were they doing once the day's food was handled? Consider this. Somewhere deep inside a cave in what is now southern France, a person holds a small torch and paints a rhinoceros onto the rock wall with pigment they ground themselves. Nobody asked them to do this. There is no audience. The paintings in Chauvet Cave are approximately 32,000 years old and depict horses, lions, and rhinos rendered with real compositional skill. Around the same period in South Africa, someone walked 100 kilometers toward the coast, collected small seashells, brought them home, and then spent hours drilling tiny holes through each one so they could be worn as jewelry. And in Germany, a 40,000-year-old vulture bone flute with 5 carefully spaced finger holes suggests that whoever made it understood music well enough to engineer an instrument from scratch. Every time archaeologists look closely at the ancient record, they find the same thing: not relentless survival, but humans doing what humans apparently cannot stop doing: making things, decorating things, and showing off. The social dimension was just as rich. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner spent years recording conversations among the Jew/Honsi and found a consistent pattern. Daytime talk was practical, tracking animals, dividing food, coordinating tasks. But nighttime conversation around the fire shifted into myths, jokes, stories about distant places, and speculation about the future. Wiesner argued that this is essentially where human culture was built, in those fire-lit hours when survival was temporarily handled, and minds were free to wander somewhere larger than the immediate present. None of this means ancient life was without difficulty. Infant mortality was brutal. Injuries that are minor today could be fatal. Drought and conflict were recurring threats. But once the day's needs were met, people generally had far more flexibility over how they spent the remaining hours than the average modern worker sitting under fluorescent lights at 4 in the afternoon does. Then agriculture arrived, and that structure changed permanently. Around 10,000 years ago, humans in the Fertile Crescent began planting seeds and domesticating animals, and a trap quietly closed behind them. Agriculture was not better for the individuals who practiced it. The skeletal evidence makes that clear, but it was dramatically better at feeding far larger populations. Once a community grew large enough to depend on farming, there were simply too many mouths to sustain by returning to hunting and gathering. More food enabled more people required more food, and more food required more labor, which eventually required specialization, coordination, and the slow invention of employment, management structures, and, roughly 10,000 years later, Gary. And here is the detail that makes all of this genuinely strange. Hunter-gatherers had no concept of retirement because there was nothing to retire from. Elderly members continued contributing in whatever ways suited their ability, sharing knowledge, caring for children, telling stories by the fire. The idea that you would spend the most capable decades of your life doing work you did not choose, saving just enough to eventually stop, and only then begin living the way you actually wanted to live, would have been completely incomprehensible to them. Leisure was not the reward waiting at the end of a long career. It was woven into much of everyday life. The version of human existence we consider normal, the 40-hour week, the idea that your value is measured in your productivity, is not some timeless feature of the human condition. It is a very recent and somewhat accidental invention built on top of a far older template. The life a lot of people are currently working 90,000 hours to eventually retire into is not some modern reward waiting at the finish line. It is the original human experience, the one our species lived for nearly 300,000 years before we invented agriculture, cities, and employment. Gary just came later.